Have you ever stumbled upon a dark family secret? My grandmother has all the dirty little secrets, but she's too proper to spill anything. Until this one night when she told me about my grandfather's, her husband's, family. Essentially they were poor, living off the streets and trying to earn money during Australia's gold rush. Anyways, the family had too many kids and not enough money, so they sold one of their kids to a Chinese businessman. He would have been my grandfather's great uncle, I suppose. No one knew and she hasn't said boo of it since then. Edit. I'm a Chinese person minoring in business administration. How can I purchase an Australian kid? The only reason my family is in California instead of New York is because my dad's father wanted to follow his mistress, which nobody knew about until he died, to California. So he uprooted his entire family and made them move over here. Also, my late uncle was a psychopath who killed a homeless guy in the 1980s for no reason. He stood trial, but was acquitted because there supposedly wasn't any evidence. My cousin is very serious about his genealogy hobby. He finds relatives we didn't know existed and jets out to meet them, exchanging stories, tintypes, and the like. Back in 2007 he was visiting such relatives in Iowa and discovered that our ancestor committed suicide by cutting his throat with a pocket knife while on board a U.P. train about 6 miles west of Kearney, Nebraska. I have a transcribed account of the December 1881 newspaper story, which was unnervingly detailed. The headline reads, "The Sad Ending of Jim Harris." It is a very spooky, interesting read. My maternal grandfather sexually abused my mother and all 6 of my aunts, and possibly my 5 uncles as well. I found out when my mom and aunt were drinking one night after my grandfather died. My dad joined the military because his parents found out about his cocaine problem and kicked him out of their house. Only found this out because my mom told me when I was in high school and having to deal with my dad's cocaine addiction resurfacing. Found out through an angry vent given by my mother that most of my cousins aren't legitimate, and most of my aunts had lied to their husbands about the true father of their children. Also found out that there was a very large niche of the family I had never met and that no one really admits to because they are all inbred. My grandfather had a younger brother who was mentally retarded. He pretty much took care of this brother completely until he was about 18. When he left for college, he came back and the brother had been put in a mental institution for years. No one had told my grandfather. The retarded brother was so traumatized that he recognized no one. Not even my grandfather. My mother only recently found out about him. My cousin is actually most likely my sister. Edit. For all those who asked. It's actually my stepdad's side of the family. My cousin is 3 years older than I am. As she told me, apparently my stepdad had some sort of hook, affair or fling with his brother's wife. That's when she, my aunt, got pregnant. At some point they confessed to my cousin after her mom died and gave her the option to find out for sure. She decided she didn't want to know. For me, it explains why she used to come live with us off and on, and also why my cousin is closer to my stepdad than I am, even though he and my mom have been together since I was a few months old, which makes what you two did even worse. Not really that dark, but it was a big one in my family. My grandmother's cousin married a man she met in college. They had a daughter and were married for maybe 40 years. 3 years ago, he passed with cancer. We were not shocked at this. After all, he was approaching 70 and had a bad form of cancer, and it was spreading fast. We were prepared for this. What we weren't prepared for was that after he passed, his wife found a journal of his which explained that for 35 years, he was having another relationship with a man. It was a shock to all of us. He was so committed to his wife that he never left. But at the same time, it must have killed him to stay silent for such a long time. It's not a dark secret, but it was a damn well kept one. My father is the result of a Nazi RP in World War II Croatia. His stepdad tried to kill him many times as a young child. Each time his mother would put my father under her skirts to protect him and threaten to kill herself. My father left home at the age of 15 after being threatened one too many times by family members and others. Too ashamed of his origin, went to Australia to start a new life. I didn't find this out until my late teens. TLDR. My grandfather was a Nazi rapist. I found out that one of my ancestors was exiled from Russia for challenging an army officer to a duel with swords and winning. My ancestor worked in the Tsar's stable, and the argument arose when the army officer insisted on riding my ancestor's horse. The horse threw him off and the army officer shot it. We've always been horse people. Duel. My friend. Duel. My grandmother just confessed to me last week that she was a borderline alcoholic and at age 50 started going to AA by herself at the Jewish church so she wouldn't run into her Catholic friends, and quit drinking then. No one even noticed because she had hid her drinking so well from her husband and 5 children. She didn't tell her husband for almost 30 years and he was shocked. My mom, dad and brother all don't know yet. Synagogue, not Jewish church, sorry. I was tired when I wrote this. We call those synagogues. All this time my family thought that my weird Hungarian last name meant boat builder. Well, recently we were enlightened to learn that the closest meaning is actually man who goes around the village at night and picks up the shti buckets from doorsteps. A long time ago, back when I was still in middle school, my mom's best friend died. She wouldn't tell me how she died, only that it was sudden. When I asked why we weren't going to the funeral, she told me that there wouldn't be one because her body was being donated to science. I didn't ask any more questions. That was the last time we ever talked about her. Well, 5 months ago my mom handed me her phone to find the number for Domino's, and as I'm scrolling through her contacts I come across the phone number of the dead best friend. Biggest WTF moment of my life. The next day I called it from a payphone at Waffle House and she picked up. I instantly recognized the voice and accent. She's not dead. Second biggest WTF moment of my life. For some reason I imagine you were scrolling through her contacts and right before Domino's was dead best friend. This needs a follow-up. Too much of a cliffhanger. My great something was on a raid killing natives back around the whole Western expansion business, and had his horse shot out from under him. He slit its belly open, gutted it, and hid inside until the rest of his party was killed and he was left alone. If my ancestors weren't such cowards, I wouldn't exist. I hear they smell better on the outside. That between having me and my sister, my mother also had a little boy whose brain wasn't fully developed. She had to choose to take him off life support soon after he was born. Also, my grandmother and grandfather were part of the resistance in a country in Europe during World War II. Part of that meant smuggling people across borders and forging papers. I found out that my grandma had to shoot someone when one of their operations went wrong. My step-great-grandmother killed my biological great-grandmother and great-grandfather. She killed my biological great-grandmother by pushing her off a building. Everyone thought she was drunk because it was some rooftop party back in the 20s. She wanted my great-grandfather because he was wealthy at the time. He lost almost everything in the stock market crash. And when they realized they wouldn't recover, she left him for a man who was still wealthy. My step-great-grandfather poisoned my real great-grandfather. She admitted all this to my mother on her deathbed. Grandma Velma was a f***ing psycho. My family is mostly Portuguese. It used to be completely so. But my paternal grandfather married a French woman. All my life my grandfather called her something in Portuguese that I couldn't understand. Last year at Thanksgiving I found out it meant the French WHRE. My grandfather's parents hated her and called her that. My grandfather decided to own it and made it a pet name. Not terribly dark, but it blew my mind at the time, and is pretty sweet. Great grandma had an affair with a clown. An actual clown. And there was some question as to whether my grandpa was the son of said clown. Was he acting funny? My friend's mom, not mine, was one of a few children from a Catholic school when she was a kid who pressed charges against a priest who was accused of child molestation. 20 years after the fact, during a family Thanksgiving dinner, she got blackout drunk and admitted to the whole family that she had never been touched by the priest, nor any of her friends. They just wanted the cash from a settlement. She still has all of the money and I shouldn't know. But my friend did the same thing when he got drunk and told me. P.S. Not my mom. That is rather CNTY of her. She single-handedly destroyed that man's life. For money. Soul sucking. My ancestors ran brothels way back in the day. That's not dark. That's pimping. When I first started dating my girlfriend, I was invited to her very conservative Catholic parents' 25th wedding anniversary party. I was hanging out with her and her 24-year-old older brother afterwards. And she was talking about how her mom found her birth control earlier that week and lectured her about how wrong premarital sex was. We weren't having sex. I quick did some mental math and said she should talk since her brother's birthday is in 5 months. They both looked at me with a crazy amount of shock on their faces. They had never figured that out. When I read this, in my head it sounded like you said that in front of her parents. I found out last night that my mom's nickname in high school was Little Miss Sunbeam. That's because Sunbeam bread used to be advertised as the bread with no holes texture and my mom refused to put out. An ex of mine was telling me that her father made films as a hobby of sorts and he actually had some success on the indie horror cult classic scene. So one day I was bored and decided to Google his name and found a bunch of his films. In most of them, the main character was my ex's mother and she had at least one full frontal nudity scene in each. She was pretty attractive and I'm open-minded about nudity anyways. But I have to say I felt a little weird when I watched one of the sex scenes between the mother and the father. I couldn't look her in the eyes after that point. You left out that you fapped to it. My family suspects my great-grandfather in the murder of my great-grandmother. People asked for details. So here's an edit. He had what we suspect were undiagnosed schizophrenia symptoms. Some males in my family have diagnosed similar problems. Their marriage was emotionally abusive. My grandmother, their only child, recounts him being amazingly cold. She's never told me she suspects him, but all her children do. The police recorded it as a botched home invasion and didn't investigate him. They were divorced by that time. Only his old things were missing from the house. And the murder weapon was ruled to be an unaccounted for axe. He continued to have odd relations to the rest of the family coming for Christmas etc. because they didn't have proof. They didn't confront him. A picture of him hangs in my grandmother's house because her mother painted it. It's somewhat haunting. Growing up, I believed I was the only girl in my family to be sexually assaulted. Recently, I learned that every female in my immediate family has been sexually assaulted. All around the same age I was. And in nearly the same circumstances in which my assault occurred. Although it's silly. Because clearly it's just a coincidence. It makes me fear having children. Because for all I know, this will be the fate of my daughters as well. My grandfather died in the 70s of cancer but no one ever told me anything about him. Anyway, I was interested one day so I looked him up and it turned out he was in the army, the British Commandos to be exact. He was Welsh. I did a bit more digging to see if any of his squad was alive. But I turned out every single one was dead. Mostly of cancer. Eventually I decided to confront my gran and sure enough, there were the photos of him in a specific Japanese city after the atom hit. My grandfather and his brothers were arrested during Prohibition for making and distributing bootleg alcohol as part of a major underground project. I discovered this while doing a school project at the library in high school which gave me access to old newspaper archives. I obviously searched for my last name. The first hit matched my grandfather and his siblings. My mom's side of the family tends to not be very pleasant. Thus, My mom keeps my family out of their affairs unless it's a funeral. Because of this, I never knew about a few of my cousins until recently. Turns out I have a cousin who once went out drunk driving in the winter and hit a car with a young family in it. His stupidity killed the mother, severed the father's legs off, nearly disemboweled the toddler via seatbelt, and shook up the baby. After all of that, my aunt still claims that her precious baby boy is completely innocent and God works in mysterious ways. I'm pretty happy that my mom never brought us around them. A few things, nothing too crazy, but I recently found out my grandpa on my mother's side was a high-ranked member of a deadly biker gang, don't know which one, and was arrested for attempted murder after stabbing two men a total of 112 times in a bar. I am closely related to mob boss Vito Genovese on my father's side. My grandmother was raised by him in Missouri and knew quite a few secrets of his life she would never tell me or my father, and she took them to her grave. Edit. Spelling. Edit 2. Vito Genovese is on my father's side. How the hell does a person stab two guys 112 times and not manage to kill at least one of them? Got real drunk with my dad after my first combat tour. He is also a combat vet. Vietnam era. We were talking about killing and the feelings that go along with it, mostly pleasure and shame for that pleasure, and he spilled the beans about some shit. He told me my mother was arped violently shortly after they were married in the late 60s. Got pregnant and carried the child to term. All this time I've thought she was just my oldest sister. At the time he was very recently discharged and hadn't yet moved away from the Camp Pendleton area. So he snatched up a few of the guys from his old unit, rented a panel van and kidnapped the rapist. They took the guy out in the middle of nowhere, gang raped and killed him and threw him into a ravine. To me, the most absurd part about the whole thing was how he described justifying it internally. He studied economics after he got out, and his rationale was basically, if there's a hell, I'm already going for some other shit. So my marginal cost of further sinning is basically zero. Crazy shit. Edit. After my uncle passed away, the family came out with the he was gay and was molested as a child at the church. But we held back the truth so we would not smear the Catholic name. It's also why we stopped going back to that church. F-king bigots, the lot of them. No one liked Uncle Benny, but one of my proudest moments was when he tried to make it painfully obvious that he was gay by asking the family if they'd like to watch Brokeback Mountain with him, and that it would mean a lot to him. Everyone meandered out of the living room, but I sat my ass there and watched it with him. He had a deadly silent fart during the movie, but I held my breath and didn't make it awkward like a champ. Not about my family, but when I was a junior in high school I started dating this guy, and when I told my mom his name she got this weird look on her face. She eventually told me that she knew his dad in high school and that he ran off his senior year and got married. Had a daughter who died of brain cancer when she was like 5, and then he got divorced a couple years later. Eventually he got remarried and had my then boyfriend. So basically I found out he had an older half sister he never knew about. I never had the nerve to bring it up. My dad doesn't know that I have 2 younger brothers and a sister. I'm also trying to look for them. So, any websites I can use? Please and thank you for your services. Edit. Thanks for all the help. You guys suggested Ancestry.com. Although you guys offered to help me, I'm really grateful. I've decided that I want to be the person that finds them. Alone. Because of some issues. But overall, I'm really grateful. Take care and have a nice day. Welp. One day when I was 19, my father, who used to be a comedian of some repute in the 60s, told me that he had not only taken Barbara Streisand's virginity, but apparently carried on a sordid, in his own 76-year-old words, affair with her for years to come. Through her first and his first 2 marriages. Not so much a dark family secret as a neat thing he told me. Some background. My parents had his and hers closets. And for as long as I could remember my father always told me I was not allowed in his closet under any circumstances. Fine by me. Fast forward to about 3 years ago. I had recently taken a test and lost a couple points on what I believed to be an issue of semantics. And I asked my father, among other people, whether or not he agreed it was simply an issue of semantics. He wasn't sure. But he thought I was right. I argued with the teacher the next day and got the points back. But I was still curious, so I decided to Google the issue. I found a forum post with the exact same issue. Same question I'd had on the test. So I figured it was someone I'd asked earlier. But the profile picture was some woman I'd never met. Figuring it may have been someone's spouse, girlfriend, etc. I decided to search the user's posting history. And that's how I learned my dad is a transvestite. First thing I did was open his closet and confirm.